أهلا بكم مشاهدينا الكرام في لقاء خاص مع وزير الخارجية السويدي توبايس بيلستروم. سيد بلستروم، دعني أولا أشكرك لإتاحة هذا اللقاء معنا على سكاي نيوز عربية.
Thank you very much. Nice to be with you.
Thank you so much. سيد توبايس، كيف تقيم التعاطي الأوروبي مع أزمة الحرب في غزة؟ وهل كان بالإمكان إنقاذ آلاف الضحايا من المدنيين لو كانت اتخذت قرارات أكثر حسما؟
Well, first of all, allow me to say that it is undeniable that the situation in Gaza is catastrophic for the civilian population, and that, of course, this is something which all countries in the world community has to take very seriously. And it is exactly for this reason that we have been so engaged in the dialogue for many months now between Sweden, with the Arab states, and of course also with the United States and with Qatar, who has had a responsibility for leading the negotiation on the hostages. And that brings me to my conclusion that the only way we can end this is by seeing to it that we now have an immediate humanitarian ceasefire, the release unconditionally of all hostages, and a surge of humanitarian assistance to relieve the people who are now residing inside of Gaza. This is the only way forward. And then we have to return to the negotiating table to press on with the two-state solution so that we can have one state, Israel, and one state, Palestine, for two people living side by side in security and with safety guarantees from the world. This is the Swedish government's approach, and this is the policy which we conduct in the European Union and in the world community through the United Nations. And we are very happy for the proposal, which was now during the last night brought forward, the resolution in the Security Council with 14 votes and only one Russia abstention in this vote. That means that the world community is now fully engaged in this peace plan which is on the table. And we do hope that all parties, Hamas, last but not least, will also agree to this peace plan.
هل أوروبا معنية بالصراع في غزة وإيجاد حلول دائمة وسلام مستدام؟ هل ينعكس ذلك على أمنها برأيكم؟
Well, that's many questions in one. But allow me to first state very clearly that, of course, the European Union is engaged in this conflict and has been for many months now. And years for that matters, because as I said, the two-state solution is the only solution. And in this, I feel that the broad majority of member states of the European Union are very keen to see this carried out. Secondly, engagement can come in many ways. I myself visited the region just a few weeks ago. I visited both the Palestinian Authority in Ramallah, I visited Israel, and I visited the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. And I can say from my visits and my talk with the Prime Minister Mustafa, with the Israeli Foreign Minister Katz, and also, of course, with both His Majesty King Abdullah II and his Foreign Minister Ayman Safadi, and I do feel that we are on track. There is a renewed interest in the conflict and a renewed interest in the conflict resolution. And I can assure you that Sweden will, as we have always done, throughout many years and decades, remain constantly engaged in seeing to it that we can achieve peace to this troubled part of the world. Peace for both Palestinians and Israelis. That is the commitment of the Swedish government.
لكن حمل إسرائيل على الالتزام بحل الدولتين والاعتراف بالدولة الفلسطينية يحتاج إلى جهود من قبلكم، أليس كذلك؟
Well, it takes two to tango, and it's both Israel and Hamas that has to agree to this. And although the European Union has not been party in the actual negotiation on the ceasefire and the hostages, that has been the doing of the United States, of Egypt, and of course also of Qatar, together with Israel and Hamas. We now see perhaps the light in the tunnel. There is now a peace proposal on the table, and you can rest assured, as I said, that the European Union will back this. That is my firm belief. Sweden will press for this inside the European Union. And I believe that this peace negotiation alternative, this proposal which is now on the table, is the only viable solution for achieving at a humanitarian immediate ceasefire, the release of all hostages, and a surge of humanitarian assistance into Gaza, and then, of course, the two-state solution. There is one thing, though, which I would like to mention, since you said that this conflict has been raging over years and decades. That is absolutely true. However, every conflict, every eruption in the conflict has led to renewed interest in the peace solution. That was true after the Yom Kippur in 1973. It was true after the first Intifada that brought us the Oslo Agreement. And it was also true about the second Intifada, which brought forward the Israeli retreat out of Gaza. However, we have to think forward now, and we have to seize this opportunity, which has been left to us through this terrible events that came across him on the 7th of October, and all the terrible events that has followed with the very pressing and very bad situation, catastrophic view of the Swedish government.
إذن سيد توبايس، هل تدعمون الاعتراف بالدولة الفلسطينية كما اتجهت بعض الدول الأوروبية مؤخراً؟
Well, it's actually 10 years since Sweden recognized the Palestinian states. That was done in 2014. So we already have recognized Palestine. And actually, we were the first member state of the European Union ever to do so.
هل برأيكم يمكن تقديم موقف أوروبي موحد بشأن ما يسمى اليوم التالي للحرب ورسم مستقبل غزة؟
Indeed, I can. And already as early as in December last year, I took part in a meeting in Oslo, convened with the representatives of the Nordic states, Nordic foreign ministers, the foreign ministers of the Benelux countries, and foreign ministers of the Arab states. And at that meeting was for the first time the question of day after, I think, debated and discussed in a coherent manner. It is my firm belief that in the day after, the European Union will have a very important role to play with assistance and aid to the Palestinian Authority to see to it that that can become a functioning organization, a functioning institution with civil servants, with policemen, and with the ability to govern both the West Bank and Gaza at the same time. And also financial assistance to see to it that we can carry out a solution within the two-state solution. And that calls for money, and both the European Union, the United States, and the Arab states will have a part to play. Let me also say one thing very clearly. One thing which must not be overlooked is the violence directed against extremist settlers towards innocent Palestinian civilians on the West Bank. That has to cease immediately. And I was very clear in my meeting with the foreign minister of Israel that both Sweden and the European Union looks very, very closely to this matter. Innocent Palestinian lives are being lost, and that is unacceptable. There has to be a very clear signal sent from the Israeli government that extremist settlers should not be allowed to carry out this. And we are not in any way strangers to increased sanctions against extremist settlers on the West Bank. Just to make that absolutely clear, that this is also part of the day after, but it should be done already now and not the day after.
بالحديث عن الانضمام للناتو والصراع في أوكرانيا، سيد توبايس، بعد قرنين من الحياد أصبحت السويد رسميا العضو 32 في حلف الناتو بعد عامين من المفاوضات. هل ترون أن السويد أصبحت أكثر أمنا في محيطها حتى بعد التهديدات الروسية بالانتقام لعضوية فنلندا والسويد بالناتو؟
Yes, it is very clear that our membership of NATO has increased the safety and security of us, but also of our neighbors in the Baltic Sea region, but of course also to all the states of NATO. With Sweden and Finland having joined NATO, there has been a change, a geopolitical change, which is very important when it comes to safety and security. And we choose to leave behind 200 years of being a non-military aligned state, because we saw what Russia's aggression against Ukraine really means. Russia is, by doing this, putting aside all regards for the international rules-based order, which is so dear to Sweden. It shows that it is ready to use extreme violence against other states in order to rebuild its neo-colonial ambitions and neo-imperial ambitions, to see to it that other states have to be put into chains under Russia's command. And this is unacceptable to us. I would like to refer to the letter sent in 2021, prior to the invasion, by Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, where he wrote in this letter to the world on orders of his master, Putin, that Sweden and Finland should never be allowed to join NATO. Now, we take our sovereignty very seriously. No one has the right to send any kind of letter in that regard. And that showed how Russia feels about itself and, as I said, its imperial ambitions. It was not the only reason why we joined NATO. We have been very closely aligned with NATO. We have been working together with NATO ever since the 1990s. But this letter showed that it was necessary for both Sweden and Finland to join NATO.
طيب، لكن بينما تشعر أوروبا بالخطر، هل لديكم اعتقاد بأن روسيا بالفعل قد تقدم على انتهاك أراضيكم إن لم يتم ردعها أو التصدي لها؟
Well, first of all, Russia has shown very clearly with Ukraine what it is capable of. And Ukraine represents something very serious, namely a perspective on the international rules-based order, where Russia feels that it can put that aside and instead use might, replacing right with might. Now, this is unacceptable to Sweden. We have institutions in the world, the United Nations, we have the International Criminal Court, we have other institutions which we use to solve conflicts between states. War is a thing of the past. We decided after the Second World War that there was such a thing as a crime of aggression, a crime that could be dealt with under international law. And let me be very clear, what Russia has committed in Ukraine, the deeds, the aggression, and also the individual deeds committed by soldiers and security officers against the innocent civilians in Ukraine, that has to be punished. So coming back to your question, do we feel threatened? Yes, we feel threatened. Finland feels threatened. The Baltic states around the Baltic Sea feels threatened about Russia's action, because Russia has made it very clear that it wants a sphere of interest, a sphere of states around its perimeter, around its border, where it should be dominating. And this is also the reason why we have this broad support against Russia's aggression in the United Nations General Assembly. This is why states from Asia, from Africa, from Latin America vote against Russia and in favor of condemning Russia's aggression against Ukraine, because they also know what would happen if you allow the rules-based international order to disappear, which it would do if we allow Russia to continue with its aggression. This is also the reason why we support Ukraine politically, militarily, economically, and humanitarian, and we will continue to do so until Ukraine has won the war.
لكن أنتم بذلك تستفزون الجانب الروسي كما ترى موسكو، يعني ألا يعد ذلك استفزازا لروسيا؟
First of all, the only country which provokes anyone is Russia. We are a sovereign nation. We make our own decisions with whom to cooperate with whom we want to have security arrangements with, and no one is to tell Sweden or Finland or any other country what we should do or shouldn't do. Secondly, it is Russia that is constantly provoking the world by talking about using nuclear weapons, by talking about aggression against Poland or the Baltic states. It is Russia that constantly chooses to use this rhetoric and rattle its saber, as you say, against the world. And the world has to stand up against Russia, showing Russia that enough is enough. This is not the way we want the world to function. We want a world where smaller states have a say. We don't want a world where bigger states sit down and divide the world between them. And let me tell you something. Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, has been very clear about how he feels with this. He said at the Munich Security Conference already back in 2008 that in 18 or 15, after the Napoleonic War in Europe, that was peak diplomacy at the Vienna Conference, when the big states sat down and drew the map of how Europe was to be constructed. An idea, by the way, which was then brought forward out into the world, which led to exactly the colonialization which so many countries feel so strongly about in our time. I think we should take, a leaf out of that book and understand that Russia has never changed, but Putin has the same idea that the secretary generals of the Communist Party or the imperial tsars of Russia had prior to the revolution. Russia hasn't changed. Its mindset is the same, and so we have to stand up against it. And this is exactly what we are doing, together with all the other countries in the United Nations who are against neo-colonialism and neo-imperialism.
بالحديث عن استفزاز روسيا، ما موقفكم من إقدام دول أوروبية على إبداء الموافقة على استخدام أسلحتها من قبل أوكرانيا لضرب أهداف في العمق الروسي أو على الحدود الأوكرانية الروسية؟
Well, we have provided Ukraine with weapons and we haven't set any kind of restrictions on them. Ukraine is attacked by Russia, and as long as you in the defense hold yourself within the limits of international human rights, you are allowed to use those weapons as well.
سيد توبايس بلستروم وزير الخارجية السويدي، شكرا لإتاحة هذا اللقاء لنا على سكاي نيوز عربية.
Thank you very much. We'll meet at another time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.